It was a quiet evening in suburban Chicago, the kind where the air felt crisp and cool, carrying with it the faint scent of fallen leaves. The streets were calm, illuminated by the soft glow of streetlights casting long shadows across empty sidewalks. Judge Evelyn Harper sat behind the wheel of her sleek black BMW, humming softly along to the radio as she drove home from a long day at work. Known for her sharp mind, unwavering fairness, and dedication to justice, Harper had earned respect, not just in the courtroom but throughout the community. Tonight, though, all thoughts of legal briefs and court cases were far from her mind. She was simply looking forward to relaxing at home. As she approached an intersection, Harper noticed flashing blue and red lights reflecting off her rearview mirror. Her heart sank slightly. She knew what those lights meant. Pulling over to the side of the road, she took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. After all, she hadn't done anything wrong. She checked her speedometer earlier and made sure everything was in order before leaving the courthouse. Still, being pulled over is never pleasant, no matter how innocent you are. Moments later, Officer Daniel Grayson stepped out of his patrol car. He adjusted his hat and walked toward Harper's vehicle, his boots clicking against the pavement. Grayson was a seasoned officer, having served on the force for over a decade. With his neatly pressed uniform and confident stride, he exuded authority. But tonight, there was something different about him, a hint of tension in his posture. Perhaps, or maybe it was just the way he carried himself under the dim streetlight. Whatever it was, Harper couldn't quite put her finger on it. Grayson stopped beside her driver's side window and gestured for her to roll it down. Harper complied, offering a polite smile. "Good evening, officer," she said, her voice steady and warm. "Is there a problem?" Instead of responding immediately, Grayson leaned down slightly, peering into the car. His eyes scanned the interior, the leather seats, the dashboard, the small stack of papers sitting neatly on the passenger seat. Then, without warning, his expression hardened. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his tone clipped and official. Harper frowned, caught off guard by the question. "No, sir, I don't," she replied honestly. "I wasn't speeding, and I've been following all traffic rules." Grayson hesitated for a moment, then straightened up. "Your plates came back flagged in our system," he explained. "This vehicle has been reported stolen." The words hit Harper like a punch to the gut. "Stolen? That couldn't be right." She glanced at the steering wheel, then back at Grayson, trying to process what he just said. "That's impossible," she finally managed. "This is my car, or rather my husband's. We bought this legally through a dealership." Grayson didn't seem convinced. In fact, if anything, his skepticism only deepened. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he instructed, his hand resting lightly on the holster of his gun. It wasn't a threat exactly, but the gesture sent a clear message. This wasn't up for debate. For a split second, Harper considered arguing further. How could this happen? She and her husband weren't careless people. They wouldn't knowingly buy a stolen car. But as much as she wanted to protest, she also understood that cooperating was the best course of action. Taking a deep breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out onto the curb. The cool night air wrapped around her as she stood face to face with Grayson. For the first time, she got a good look at him. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a stern expression etched onto his face. There was a hardness in his eyes, a determination that suggested he'd dealt with situations like this countless times before. Yet, there was also something else, a flicker of uncertainty, maybe, or perhaps even discomfort. Harper couldn't tell for sure. "Officer," she began again, choosing her words carefully, "I assure you there must be some mistake. My husband purchased this car recently. If there's an issue with the title or registration, I'm happy to provide any documentation you need." Grayson crossed his arms over his chest, studying her closely. "Do you have proof of ownership with you?" he asked. Harper shook her head. "Not on me, no. But I can give you contact information for the dealership. They'll confirm everything." At this point, Grayson's radio crackled to life, interrupting their conversation. Dispatch relayed additional details about the vehicle's history. confirming that it had indeed been flagged as stolen several weeks prior. Hearing this, Harper felt a wave of frustration wash over her. This wasn't just inconvenient. It was humiliating. Here she was, a respected judge, being treated like a criminal because of someone else's mistake. Determined to assert herself, Harper decided to reveal her identity. "Officer," she said firmly, meeting his gaze, "I am Judge Evelyn Harper. I serve on the bench here in Chicago. You can verify who I am if you need to." Grayson blinked, momentarily taken aback. Clearly, he hadn't expected this turn of events. For a brief moment, his rigid stance softened, and he seemed unsure of how to proceed. But just as quickly, his professionalism kicked back in. "Judge Harper," he acknowledged, nodding slightly. "I understand your position, but I still have a duty to follow protocol. Until we resolve this matter, I'm afraid I can't let you leave." And so, the standoff continued. Harper stood by the side of the road, feeling a mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. Meanwhile, Grayson remained steadfast, torn between doing his job and navigating the delicate situation unfolding before him. Neither one realized yet just how far-reaching the consequences of this encounter would be. Not just for them personally, but for the entire community watching closely from afar. The tension between Judge Evelyn Harper and Officer Daniel Grayson continued to simmer as the moments ticked by. The quiet suburban street, once serene and unassuming, now felt charged with an uneasy energy. Harper stood on the curb, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, trying to maintain her composure despite the growing frustration bubbling inside her. She couldn't believe this was happening. Here she was, a respected judge who had spent years upholding the law, being treated like a suspect in front of her own car. It didn't seem fair, and worse still, it felt deeply personal. Officer Grayson, for his part, was doing his best to remain professional. He knew that pulling over someone of Harper's stature wasn't going to be easy, but he also believed firmly in following procedure. To him, this was a straightforward case. A vehicle flagged as stolen, clear evidence linking it to criminal activity, and now a driver refusing to comply fully with his requests. But as the minutes dragged on, even Grayson began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every word he spoke seemed to escalate things further. Every action he took met with resistance or skepticism from Harper. "Judge Harper," Grayson said again, his voice firmer this time, "I understand your frustration, but I need you to cooperate. This isn't about who you are. It's about the facts. Your car is listed as stolen in our system, and until we sort this out, I can't let you drive away." Harper's eyes narrowed slightly at his words. She could hear the edge in his tone, the subtle implication that she might somehow be involved in wrongdoing. It stung more than she cared to admit. "Officer," she replied, her voice steady but laced with irritation, "you're making assumptions. Here without all the information. My husband and I bought this car legally. If there's a problem with the dealership or the paperwork, that's not my fault. You should be investigating them, not treating me like a suspect." Grayson sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew she had a point. Logically, it made sense that someone else might have tampered with the car before it reached Harper's possession. But logic wasn't always enough in situations like this. His training told him to trust the data, to prioritize the safety of the community above all else. And right now, the data said this car was stolen. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Grayson insisted, though his tone betrayed a hint of defensiveness. "But I have a job to do. Until we confirm the details, I need you to stay put. That's standard protocol." At this, Harper's patience began to wear thin. She glanced around, noticing for the first time that a small crowd had gathered nearby. A few cars had slowed down to watch the scene unfold, their drivers craning their necks to get a better look. Some pedestrians lingered on the sidewalk, whispering among themselves. One man even held up his phone, clearly recording the interaction. Harper felt a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. This wasn't just a private matter anymore, it was public spectacle. "This is ridiculous," Harper muttered under her breath, loud enough for Grayson to hear. "You're humiliating me over something I had no control over. Do you think I'd risk my career, my reputation over a stolen car? Does that sound reasonable to you? Grayson hesitated, unsure how to respond. On one hand, he understood her frustration. Being pulled over was never pleasant, especially when you hadn't done anything wrong. On the other hand, he couldn't ignore the glaring red flags in front of him. The car was stolen. That much was undeniable. Whether Harper was innocent or complicit remained to be seen, but until they sorted it out, he couldn't afford to take chances. Look, Grayson said finally, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. I don't enjoy this any more than you do, but rules are rules. Let's work together to figure this out, okay? Give me the name of the dealership and I'll contact them directly. In the meantime, please stay calm. Harper clenched her jaw, biting back a sharp retort. As much as she wanted to argue further, she knew it wouldn't help. Arguing with a police officer in front of an audience would only make her look defensive, and, given her position as a judge, appearances mattered. Instead, she forced herself to nod stiffly. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. The dealership is called Prestige Motors. They're located downtown. Call them if you must, but I expect this to be resolved quickly. Grayson nodded, jotting down the name in his notebook. Thank you, he said, his tone neutral. Then, turning back toward his patrol car, he added, Stay here while I make the call. Don't move. As Grayson walked away, Harper exhaled, sharply, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her purse for her phone. She needed to call her husband Marcus and explain what was happening. This wasn't just inconvenient. It was infuriating. How could they have ended up in this mess? Hadn't they done everything right when purchasing the car? When Marcus picked up the phone, his voice was groggy with sleep. Evelyn? He asked, sounding confused. What's going on? It's the car, Harper blurted out, pacing, back and forth along the curb. The police stopped me tonight. They say it's stolen. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What? Marcus exclaimed, suddenly wide awake. That's impossible. We went through all the proper channels. I checked the papers myself. I know, Harper replied, her voice tinged with desperation. But apparently something went wrong. Can you call the dealership first thing in the morning and get to the bottom of this? I need proof that we didn't do anything wrong, Marcus agreed, promising to handle it immediately. Hanging up, Harper felt a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. When she glanced back at Grayson, she saw that he was still on the phone, his expression unreadable. Whatever he was hearing wasn't good news. Minutes passed like hours as Harper waited anxiously. The crowd hadn't dispersed. If anything, it had grown larger. People whispered and pointed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smirking as if they were watching a live drama unfold. Harper tried to ignore them, focusing instead on staying calm. She reminded herself that she hadn't done anything wrong, that the truth would eventually come out. Still, it was hard not to feel humiliated, standing there like a suspect under scrutiny. Finally, Grayson returned, his face grim. Judge Harper, he began, his voice low. The dealership confirmed that the car was reported stolen after it left their lot. Someone falsified documents during the sale process. It looks like you and your husband were victims of fraud. Harper stared at him, stunned. So you're saying we were duped? She asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Grayson nodded. Yes, ma'am. Unfortunately, that means the car will need to be impounded as evidence until the investigation is complete. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Inconvenience, Harper echoed, her voice rising slightly. This has been a nightmare. My reputation, my dignity, it's all been called into question because of someone else's mistake. What happens next? Grayson hesitated, then offered a small, awkward shrug. We'll file a report, and you'll likely be contacted by detectives handling the case. Beyond that, there's not much I can do. Again, I apologize for the trouble. With that, Grayson turned away, signaling for a tow truck to arrive. Harper watched silently, her mind racing. She knew this wasn't the end, not by a long shot. Something about the way Grayson had handled the situation gnawed at her, leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. This wasn't just about a stolen car, anymore. It was about respect, authority, and the lingering specter of bias that seemed impossible to escape. By the time the tow truck arrived to haul away Judge Evelyn Harper's BMW, the scene on the quiet suburban street had transformed into something resembling a media circus. Word of the confrontation between a respected black judge and a white police officer had spread like wildfire, thanks in no small part to the bystanders who filmed the encounter. Within hours, snippets of the footage were uploaded to social media platforms, sparking outrage and debate across the country. The hashtags, Justice for Harper and Accountability for Grayson, began trending almost immediately, drawing attention from news outlets eager to dissect every detail of the incident. For Harper, the aftermath was overwhelming. She returned home late, that night exhausted and emotionally drained. Her husband, Marcus, greeted her at the door with a mixture of concern and anger. "Are you okay?" he asked, pulling her into a tight hug. Harper nodded, though it wasn't entirely true. Physically, she was fine, but mentally she felt battered. The events of the evening replayed in her mind over and over again, each loop amplifying her frustration and disbelief. How could this happen? Why had Officer Grayson treated her with such suspicion when she clearly posed no threat? The next morning, Harper woke up to a barrage of notifications on her phone. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers had reached out to express support, or in some cases criticism. Some praised her for remaining composed under pressure, while others questioned whether she should have handled the situation differently. News articles dissected her background, highlighting her accomplishments as a judge and framing her as a victim of systemic injustice. One headline read, "Black judge pulled over stolen car claims. Was it racial bias or just protocol?" The comment sections beneath these stories were predictably polarized. Supporters argued that Grayson's actions reflected implicit bias, pointing to the disproportionate number of traffic stops involving people of color. Critics countered that officers must enforce the law regardless of status or race, suggesting that Harper's reaction smacked of entitlement. Meanwhile, the dealership where Marcus had purchased the car became embroiled in its own controversy. Prestige Motors issued a public statement apologizing for the mix-up, explaining that they had unknowingly acquired several vehicles through fraudulent means. They assured customers that steps were being taken to prevent similar incidents in the future, including stricter verification processes. Still, the damage was done. Social media users lambasted the dealership for failing to catch the issue sooner, accusing them of negligence. Others speculated about possible connections between Prestige Motors and organized crime syndicates, a claim that remained unproven but fueled further speculation. As the days passed, the story continued to dominate. Headlines. Local news stations invited legal experts, civil rights advocates, and former law enforcement officials onto their programs to weigh in on the case. Many pointed out that Harper's experience was emblematic of broader issues within policing practices. "When a sitting judge can be treated this way," one commentator noted, "what does that say about how ordinary citizens are treated during routine traffic stops?" Another guest emphasized the importance of addressing implicit bias in training programs, arguing that officers needed better tools to navigate complex situations without resorting to knee-jerk reactions. In response to the growing public outcry, city officials announced plans to launch an internal investigation into Officer Grayson's conduct during the stop. While Grayson maintained that he had followed protocol, critics argued that his tone and demeanor suggested underlying prejudice. Community leaders called for transparency, urging the police department to release body camera footage of the incident. However, the department cited ongoing investigations as grounds for withholding the video, citing concerns about compromising the integrity of the probe. This decision only added fuel to the fire, with many accusing the department of stonewalling efforts to hold Grayson accountable. Amidst the chaos, Harper found herself thrust into the spotlight in ways she hadn't anticipated. Reporters camped outside her home, hoping to snag an exclusive interview. Emails poured into her inbox from activists asking her to join campaigns advocating for criminal justice reform. At first, Harper resisted the attention, preferring to focus on resolving the matter privately. But as the days turned into weeks, she realized that her voice carried weight, and that using it might help bring about meaningful change. One evening, Harper sat down with Marcus to discuss her options. "I don't want this to define me," she admitted, sipping a cup of tea. "But I also can't ignore what happened. If I stay silent, it feels like I'm letting them win." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You're right," he said. "This isn't just about us anymore, it's bigger than that. People are watching, waiting to see how you respond. Maybe this is your chance to make a difference." With that in mind, Harper decided to take action. She drafted a formal complaint against the police department, detailing her treatment during the traffic stop and calling for greater accountability. In a carefully worded statement released to the press, she acknowledged the challenges faced by law enforcement officers, but stressed the need for reforms aimed at reducing discriminatory practices. "No one should feel humiliated or disrespected simply because of the color of their skin or their profession," she wrote. "We owe it to ourselves and to future generations to build a system that treats everyone fairly." Her words resonated deeply with many, sparking conversations in households, workplaces, and community centers across the nation. Town halls were organized, bringing together residents, activists, and policymakers to discuss ways to improve trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Some proposed implementing mandatory de-escalation training for officers, while others advocated for increased oversight and independent review boards to investigate complaints of misconduct. Despite differing opinions on the best path forward, there was a shared sense of urgency driving the dialogue. For Officer Grayson, the scrutiny proved equally relentless. Though he had initially received support from colleagues who defended his actions as standard procedure, the tide of public opinion gradually shifted against him. Anonymous messages flooded his inbox, ranging from hateful insults to sympathetic notes urging him to reflect on his behavior. His superiors reassigned him temporarily to administrative duties pending the outcome of the internal investigation, leaving him isolated and uncertain about his future. Despite the mounting pressure, Grayson refused to speak publicly about the incident, citing department policy. Privately, however, he grappled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he believed he had done nothing wrong, that he had merely followed orders and upheld the law. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly awry. Watching the backlash unfold online, reading comments that painted him as a villain, left him questioning whether he could have handled things differently. As the weeks wore on, the story showed no signs of fading from public consciousness. For Harper, it became clear that this moment represented both a challenge and an opportunity. The stolen car debacle had exposed deep-seated fractures in society's relationship with authority, but it had also ignited a spark of hope. Perhaps, she thought, this painful chapter could lead to real progress. After all, change often begins with discomfort, and few experiences had been as uncomfortable as standing on that curb, feeling powerless despite her position of power. The internal investigation into Officer Daniel Grayson's conduct during the traffic stop with Judge Evelyn Harper unfolded slowly, like a tightly wound clock ticking toward an uncertain conclusion. Every new development seemed to stir fresh waves of debate and speculation, keeping the story alive in the public consciousness for weeks on end. For both Harper and Grayson, this period was fraught with tension, frustration, and moments of quiet reflection. The weight of the situation hung heavily over them, forcing each to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the systems they represented. For Grayson, the scrutiny felt relentless. Reassigned to desk duty while the investigation proceeded, he spent his days buried under mountains of paperwork, a far cry from the active patrols he once thrived on. His colleagues offered mixed reactions. Some stood firmly by his side, insisting he had done nothing wrong, while others kept their distance, wary of being associated with someone embroiled in such controversy. At home, Grayson struggled to explain the situation to his family. His wife, usually supportive, found herself questioning whether her husband might have handled things differently. "You followed protocol," she'd say gently, "but do you think maybe there was another way? Something that wouldn't have made her feel so attacked?" Her words lingered in Grayson's mind long after their conversations ended. He replayed the night of the traffic stop repeatedly, dissecting every word he'd said, every gesture he'd made. Had he been too stern? Too quick to assume the worst? Or had he simply done his job as he'd been trained to do? These questions gnawed at him, leaving him restless and unsure. For the first time in his career, Grayson began to wonder if the rigid rules he'd always relied upon were enough, or if something deeper, more nuanced, was required when dealing with people who weren't just suspects, but human beings with lives, careers, and reputations at stake. Meanwhile, Judge Harper threw herself into advocacy work, determined to channel her anger and frustration into action. She accepted invitations to speak at community forums, town halls, and panel discussions, using her platform to highlight systemic issues within policing practices. Her message was clear. While individual officers may not harbor ill intent, the cumulative effect of biased policies and inadequate training disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. This isn't about one officer or one incident, she emphasized during one particularly moving speech. It's about patterns we can no longer afford to ignore. Her words resonated deeply with audiences across the country. People shared clips of her speeches online, praising her eloquence and courage. Yet not everyone agreed with her perspective. Critics argued that Harper's focus on systemic bias undermined the difficult realities faced by law enforcement officers daily. Police have a tough job, one commentator wrote. They can't afford to make exceptions based on who someone is. If they start picking and choosing, chaos will follow. Others accused Harper of exploiting the situation for personal gain, suggesting that her high-profile position gave her an unfair advantage in shaping public opinion. Despite the backlash, Harper remained steadfast. She understood that change rarely came without resistance, and she was willing to endure criticism, if it meant advancing the conversation. Behind the scenes, she worked tirelessly with legal experts and civil rights organizations to draft policy recommendations aimed at improving accountability and transparency within police departments. Among these proposals were calls for mandatory body cameras, independent oversight committees, and enhanced training programs focused on cultural competency and de-escalation techniques. As the investigation progressed, investigators reviewed body camera footage, witness statements, and departmental records to piece together what had transpired that fateful evening. What emerged was a complicated picture. On paper, Grayson appeared to have acted within the bounds of his authority. The vehicle Harper was driving had indeed been flagged as stolen, and standard procedure dictated that officers treat such cases with caution. However, the tone and manner in which Grayson interacted with Harper raised red flags. Experts noted subtle shifts in his demeanor, moments where his language became more accusatory, his posture more confrontational, that suggested implicit bias may have played a role. These findings sparked heated debates among members of the review board tasked with determining Grayson's fate. Some argued that his actions warranted disciplinary action, citing the importance of fostering trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. Others countered that punishing Grayson would set a dangerous precedent, discouraging officers from enforcing the law rigorously out of fear of public backlash. After weeks of deliberation, the board reached a compromise. Grayson would retain his position but face several consequences designed to address concerns about his conduct. He was ordered to undergo sensitivity training, participate in workshops on de-escalation tactics, and serve a temporary suspension without pay. Additionally, he was reassigned to a less visible role within the department until further notice. The decision drew mixed reactions. Supporters of Harper hailed it as a step in the right direction, though many felt it didn't go far enough. Activists continued to demand broader reforms, arguing that isolated punishments failed to address the root causes of systemic inequities. Critics of the ruling, meanwhile, expressed sympathy for Grayson, framing him as a scapegoat caught in the crossfire of larger societal tensions. He was just doing his job, one officer told reporters. If we punish him for following orders, how are we supposed to function as a department? Amidst the ongoing discourse, Prestige Motors, the dealership implicated in the fraudulent sale of Harper's car, faced its own reckoning. Facing mounting pressure from customers and regulators alike, the company announced sweeping changes to its operations. In addition to implementing stricter verification processes, Prestige pledged to partner with local law enforcement agencies to ensure greater transparency in future transactions. They also offered compensation packages to affected buyers, including Harper, covering the cost of her impounded vehicle and providing additional financial support as a gesture of goodwill. While these measures helped restore some measure of trust, they couldn't undo the damage already done. For Harper, the ordeal had left lasting scars, both personal and professional. Though she received widespread acclaim for her resilience and leadership, she couldn't shake the memory of standing on that curb, feeling powerless despite her accomplishments. It was a stark reminder of how fragile trust could be, even for those in positions of authority. For Grayson, the experience marked a turning point in his career. Stripped of his former confidence, he approached his duties with newfound humility, acutely aware of the impact his actions or inactions could have on others. Though he never publicly apologized to Harper, he quietly vowed to himself that he would strive to be better, to listen more closely, and to see beyond the uniform he wore. As the dust began to settle, it became clear that the confrontation between Judge Evelyn Harper and Officer Daniel Grayson had ignited a national conversation about race, privilege, and accountability. It was a painful yet necessary dialogue, one that forced individuals and institutions to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the world they inhabited. And though neither Harper nor Grayson emerged unscathed, their shared experience underscored a universal truth. True progress often requires sacrifice, vulnerability, and an unwavering commitment to justice, even when the path forward seems uncertain. Months after the initial traffic stop, the story of Judge Evelyn Harper and Officer Daniel Grayson had evolved from a single incident into a symbol of larger societal struggles. The confrontation had sparked debates that rippled far beyond the quiet suburban street where it began, touching on issues of race, authority, transparency, and trust. For both Harper and Grayson, life had changed in ways they could never have anticipated. Though their paths had diverged since that fateful night, the echoes of their encounter continued to shape them and the world around them. For Judge Harper, the aftermath of the incident brought both challenges and opportunities. Her decision to speak out about systemic bias within law enforcement earned her widespread admiration, but also intensified scrutiny. She became a polarizing figure, celebrated by some as a champion of justice and criticized by others who accused her of playing the victim or leveraging her status for personal gain. Despite the mixed reactions, Harper remained resolute. She understood that meaningful change often came at a cost, and she was willing to bear it if it meant paving the way for a fairer, more equitable society. In the months following the controversy, Harper threw herself into advocacy work with even greater fervor. She collaborated with civil rights organizations, lawmakers, and community leaders to draft policy proposals aimed at reforming policing practices. Among her key initiatives were calls for mandatory de-escalation training for officers, the establishment of independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct, and increased funding for programs addressing implicit bias. These efforts weren't without resistance. Some politicians dismissed her ideas as impractical or overly ambitious, but Harper refused to back down. "Progress isn't easy," she often said during interviews, "but if we wait for perfect conditions, we'll never move forward." Her persistence paid off. Several cities adopted portions of her proposed reforms, implementing pilot programs designed to test their effectiveness. Community forums held in these areas revealed promising results. Residents reported feeling safer and more respected during interactions with police, while officers expressed appreciation for the tools and training that helped them navigate complex situations. Though the changes were incremental, they represented a significant step toward bridging the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Meanwhile, Officer Grayson faced his own reckoning. The disciplinary actions imposed on him, including sensitivity training, workshops on cultural competency, and a temporary suspension, forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his profession. At first, he approached these requirements with reluctance, viewing them as punishments rather than opportunities for growth. But as the weeks went by, something shifted. During one particularly impactful session, a facilitator asked participants to reflect on moments when they felt misunderstood or unfairly judged. Grayson found himself recalling the frustration and helplessness he'd witnessed in Harper's eyes during their encounter. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider how his words and actions might have contributed to her feelings of humiliation. This newfound perspective transformed Grayson's approach to policing. When he returned to active duty, reassigned to a different precinct, he made a conscious effort to listen more and assume less. He learned to ask questions before jumping to conclusions, to treat every individual as someone deserving of dignity and respect. It wasn't always easy. Old habits die hard, and there were days when doubt crept in. But Grayson reminded himself that progress required patience, not just from others but from himself as well. The ripple effects of Harper and Grayson's encounter extended far beyond their personal journeys. Across the country, communities engaged in spirited discussions about accountability, privilege, and the role of law enforcement in modern society. Town halls packed with concerned citizens debated everything from body camera policies to the need for greater diversity within police departments. Activists organized marches and rallies, demanding tangible reforms and holding officials accountable for promises left unfulfilled. Even schools incorporated lessons about systemic bias and social justice into their curricula, ensuring that younger generations grew up equipped to challenge inequities. Prestige Motors, too, underwent a transformation. The dealership implemented rigorous safeguards to prevent similar incidents in the future, including partnerships with law enforcement agencies to verify vehicle histories before sales. They also launched educational campaigns aimed at raising awareness about fraud in the automotive industry. While these measures couldn't erase the damage caused by the stolen car debacle, they signaled a commitment to rebuilding trust with customers and the broader public. Despite the progress made, neither Harper nor Grayson ever issued a direct apology to the other. Their pride, or perhaps their lingering discomfort, prevented such an exchange. However, in separate public statements, both acknowledged the complexity of the situation and expressed hope for a better future. What happened that night was difficult for everyone involved, Harper said during a press conference. But I believe it has opened doors for important conversations. If we can learn from this experience and use it to create positive change, then no part of it will have been in vain. Grayson echoed similar sentiments in an interview with a local news station. I know I didn't handle things perfectly, he admitted, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I could have done differently. Moving forward, my goal is to be part of the solution, not the problem. Though their paths never crossed again, the legacy of their encounter endured. It served as a reminder that even those entrusted with upholding justice are not immune to its flaws. Both Harper and Grayson emerged from the ordeal changed, not just as individuals, but as representatives of institutions grappling with deep-rooted challenges. Their story underscored the importance of humility, empathy, and resilience in the pursuit of fairness. As time passed, the memory of the traffic stop faded somewhat from the public eye, replaced by new headlines and emerging issues. Yet, its impact lingered, woven into the fabric of ongoing efforts to build a more just and equitable society. For Judge Evelyn Harper, it reinforced her belief in the power of advocacy and the necessity of standing firm in the face of adversity. For Officer Daniel Grayson, it marked the beginning of a journey towards self-awareness and growth. And for countless others inspired by their story, it offered a glimmer of hope, that even in moments of conflict and division, there lies the potential for understanding, reconciliation, and lasting change.